Hey everyone, ready to jump into some awesome strategies to really master English listening and speaking?
Sounds good.
We're going to use this podcast called The Best Way to Learn English to dig into their advice and help you all become better communicators.
I think everyone wants to get better at communicating.
Yeah, for sure.
I think what's really cool about this podcast is it goes deeper than just the usual stuff, you know?
Yeah,
It
totally.
really digs into the little details of how we learn languages and gives some tips that can actually make a difference,
For sure.
and understanding and being understood.
Right. Like I used to think active listening was just like nodding along and pretending I was like paying attention.
Yeah.
But this podcast really showed me there's way more to it than that.
Oh, yeah. It's way more than just hearing the words. It's like you got to figure out what they mean. Pay attention to the little things that can get lost.
Yeah, and that's where I think those specific techniques that they talk about on the podcast really come in, like shadowing. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it sounds kind of weird at first.
It does. It's like you're trying to be a copycat.
Right. You're like mimicking a native speaker trying to sound just like them.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, it really works to train your ear and your mouth to work together.
Oh, for sure.
It's like a musician practicing,
Totally.
you're building that muscle memory for speaking English naturally.
Yeah. The podcast even recommends finding a short clip of audio
Okay.
with a transcript and listening to it once to get the main idea and then playing it again and speaking along with it,
Yeah.
mimicking everything, the rhythm, the
Yeah.
pauses.
I know. It seems a little strange
It feels weird,
at first, but
but it's like having a coach
exactly.
right in your pocket.
Yeah.
So cool.
And, if you want to get even deeper into how spoken English works,
Okay.
they talk about this thing called transcription.
Yeah.
It sounds a little boring,
It does sound kind of tedious.
but I swear it's really useful.
Okay.
You basically listen to a recording and write down every single word. I know it's a lot, but
Yeah.
he's really cool.
Okay.
It's like looking at language under a microscope.
I'll admit, when I first heard about transcription, I was like, shh, shh. Who has time for that?
Yeah.
But then I tried it.
Okay.
And I was really surprised by how much it showed me about the little details of spoken language.
Right.
All the little filler words,
Mm.
the pauses.
Yeah.
How the way your voice goes up and down can totally change what you mean.
Oh, yeah.
It all becomes so clear when you do transcription.
It's like you're some kind of detective or something.
Right.
You start to notice these patterns you'd never hear just listening normally.
Yeah.
Maybe you realize native speakers often use little phrases, to connect their ideas. Those
Yeah.
might seem small, but
Yeah.
they're super important
Yeah.
to make your English sound smooth.
That makes sense. So once you notice these things, you can start using them yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like you've got the secret code to being fluent.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
But I think where the real magic happens is when you combine all this stuff with real conversation.
Yes, exactly. Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
And you know what this podcast talks about.
With that,
Language exchange.
language exchange.
Like finding someone who's learning your native language
Yeah.
and you can practice with them.
Right.
Oh, it's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
You both get to practice,
Yeah.
learn from each other's mistakes.
Yeah.
You can even learn about each other's cultures.
Totally. I've done that before. And it's amazing how much I learned just talking to people.
I know.
It's like having a friend who's also trying to learn and can support you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So cool.
Plus, you make new friends
Yeah.
and, see the world in a new way.
Totally. And then when you can't meet up with your language partner.
Yeah. The podcast suggests self-recording,
Oh, yeah.
which I know can be a little scary.
I know.
Who likes listening to their own voice?
I hate it.
But they say it's one of the best ways to get better
Yeah.
at pronunciation, your intonation, and fluency.
You're right. It's like having a personal coach
Yeah.
right there in your pocket.
I remember the first time I listened to a recording of myself,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God,
Right.
do I really sound like that?
Yeah. It's awful.
But then I started to pay attention to specific things,
Okay.
like how I say certain vowel sounds or
Yeah.
how I sometimes talk too fast.
Yeah.
And guess what?
What?
With practice, I actually started to sound a little better.
I know.
So cool.
It's so powerful to hear yourself.
Oh.
Because then you can actually work on those things.
Right.
Like you said, slowing down,
Yeah.
getting those sounds right,
Yeah.
putting more expression in your voice.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of putting yourself out there, The podcast also talks about joining conversation clubs,
Oh, yeah.
online or in person.
Yes.
It's like jumping into a real English-speaking environment
Yes.
where you can try out your skills and get feedback from people.
Yeah, it's great because you get to hear different perspectives, too.
Yes, definitely.
It's a great way to build confidence.
Yeah.
And, be more fluent.
Yeah.
And it's like a nice, supportive environment.
Right. Not judgmental.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you never know. You might even make some good friends.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But even though all these techniques are super helpful, the podcast also points out some common mistakes
Oh, yeah.
that English learners make,
Right.
like habits that we don't even realize are getting in the way of our communication.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And one that stuck out to me was using too many memorized phrases.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
It's like having all these amazing tools, but you only ever use a hammer.
Right.
So it's good to know some phrases. But if that's all you use, your English is going to sound kind of robotic.
Yeah, you want to sound like a real person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the key is to be flexible
Yeah.
and to choose phrases that fit what you're talking about.
Right. And that's where active listening comes back in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Because when you're really tuned into the conversation,
Yeah.
you naturally start to pick up on the right phrases to use.
It's true.
So cool.
It's like, you become this language detective.
Right.
You're always watching and learning how native speakers use English in different situations.
Yeah, love that. And speaking of observation,
Yes.
the podcast also talks about how important those nonverbal cues are,
Yeah.
like eye contact, facial expressions, body language.
Yes, it's so true.
It's like learning a whole new language.
I know.
Right,
It's amazing how much we communicate without even talking.
right.
Our faces, our hands, how we stand.
Yeah,
It all sends a message.
yeah. I remember reading that in some cultures.
Yeah.
Avoiding eye contact is actually polite,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
but in others it can seem rude.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, those cultural differences,
Yeah.
they can really change how people understand each other.
Totally.
So it's important to know about them and change how you communicate.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about nonverbal cues, the podcast also talked about eye contact during conversations.
Oh, yeah, it's really important.
Oh.
It shows that you're listening,
Right.
you're interested, and you care about what the other person is saying. It
Yeah.
makes people feel more connected.
Right. But like you said earlier, we got to remember those cultural differences.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember being in Japan a few years ago,
Okay.
and I noticed people don't really make a lot of eye contact,
That's right.
especially in like formal settings.
Yeah.
It's seen as kind of aggressive there.
Yeah, exactly. So you just got to pay attention to those differences.
Right.
And change how you act.
Totally. Yeah. And speaking of adapting how you communicate,
Yeah.
the podcast also had some cool tips on improving speaking skills.
Okay, yeah.
One that really hit home for me was not being afraid to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
I know, right? But the podcast really emphasized that mistakes are like a part of learning.
Exactly.
It's like when you're learning to ride a bike,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to fall off a bunch of times
Yeah.
before you can ride it.
Exactly.
We learn by making mistakes.
Oh,
You-
goodness.
that we get better
Yeah.
and become more confident.
Exactly. And, one of the best ways to find out where you need to improve
But
is to record yourself.
I know it can be super awkward
It is.
to listen to your own voice,
The worst.
but I swear it helps.
No.
It's like having a mirror
Yeah.
for how you speak English.
Yeah.
You can hear all the little things,
Yes.
the stumbles,
Yeah.
the weird pauses,
Mhm.
the words you pronounce wrong
Nah.
that you don't even realize you're doing.
Yeah.
When I first started recording myself, I was like, whoa,
Uh-huh.
I use and like way too much.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't even realize I was doing it.
It's crazy what you hear when you actually listen to yourself.
It's so true.
But then you can work on those things.
Right.
You can, like you said, get rid of those filler words.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Uh-huh.
Work on those tricky sounds.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the best part is you can do it anytime, anywhere.
Yeah.
You don't need any fancy stuff.
Nope.
Just your phone or computer.
And yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of practice,
Yeah.
the podcast also says we should look for chances to have real conversations,
Oh, yeah.
like going to conversation clubs,
Yeah.
doing language exchanges,
Yeah.
or just talking to English speakers around you.
Absolutely.
The key is to just use the language.
Yes. Get out there and use it.
Right, like taking your language skills for a test drive.
Yes.
You're going to hit some bumps.
Yeah.
But that's how you learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every conversation is a chance to learn something new.
Totally.
Try new phrases.
Yeah.
Get better at communicating.
So true.
Yeah.
Even if you mess up,
Yeah.
don't give up.
Don't let it get you down.
Yeah.
Keep talking. Keep practicing.
You keep learning.
Yes.
So true. So, we've talked about a lot,
We have.
from active listening to speaking strategies
Yeah.
to common mistakes.
Yeah.
But before we go to the next part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Transitional phrases.
Oh, yeah.
Those little words and phrases that connect our thoughts and make our speech flow better.
Yeah, they're like the glue that holds everything together.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
You need strong beams to keep it from falling apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
And those phrases help people understand what we're saying,
They really do.
right?
Yeah. They show us when ideas are changing. They emphasize important points, and they make our speech sound more organized.
Totally. The podcast gave some great examples like,
Yeah.
however.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
furthermore,
Yeah.
in addition to
Right.
it's crazy how much these little words can improve how we speak.
It really is. It's like adding punctuation to your spoken language.
Right.
They break things up,
Uh-huh.
make it easier to listen to.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot today,
We have.
and I'm feeling super inspired to use all these tips.
Me too.
But before we wrap up this part, I have a challenge for everyone listening.
Ooh, a challenge.
Yes. I challenge you to pick one active listening technique we talked about today and actually use it in your next conversation.
Oh, I love that.
It could be asking those clarifying questions.
Yeah.
Or repeating what someone said to make sure you got it.
Yeah.
Or just like really trying to focus and be present.
Oh, that's so important.
Yeah.
It's like taking what we've learned and actually doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to hear about your experiences. Tell us on social media or on our website.
Yes, we want to hear from you.
We love hearing from all you language learners out there.
Yes.
All right. So let's take a short break
Sounds good.
and then come back for the last part of our deep dive into the best way to learn English.
Okay.
We're going to talk about even more tips and tricks
Can't wait.
to help you become super confident and awesome communicators.
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, so we're back and still exploring this world of listening and speaking with the best way to learn English as our guide.
Yeah. And we were talking about active listening.
Yes, like really tuning in to what someone's saying.
To everything they're saying.
Right. Both the words and like their body language and all that.
Yeah, all those little cues.
Right.
And, one of the best tips from the podcast was about asking clarifying questions.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
It's so simple,
Yeah,
but it makes a big difference.
totally. Like instead of just nodding along like you get it,
Yeah.
you actually stop and ask if something's not clear.
Exactly. It shows that you're really listening and you want to understand.
Right.
And it can help avoid those awkward moments
Yeah,
when people misunderstand each other.
totally. Like I remember this one time I was talking to a coworker
Uh-huh.
from England,
Okay.
and he said, "Bob's your uncle."
Oh, yeah.
I had no idea what that meant.
Classic.
So I was like, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, good for you.
And he laughed and said it's like a British saying.
Uh-huh.
That basically means like, there you go, or
Mhm.
it's that easy.
Right.
I felt a little silly,
Oh, no.
but I was so glad I asked
Yeah.
because I learned something new.
Exactly, and you didn't just pretend you knew.
Right. And speaking of learning new things,
Yeah.
the podcast also mentioned being aware of those nonverbal cues.
Oh, yeah, like that body language stuff.
You have like a whole secret language.
It is. It's crazy how much we say without using words.
Right. Like our faces,
Yeah.
our hands.
Their posture.
Yeah, the way we sit or stand. It all means something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that, like, in some cultures,
Uh-huh.
not making eye contact is a sign of respect.
Right.
But in others, it can be, like, rude or dismissive.
Yeah, that's right.
Crazy, right?
It is, so you got to be careful.
Yeah.
Those differences can really affect how we communicate.
Totally. So it's important to, like, know about them and be respectful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And since we're talking about nonverbal cues,
Yeah.
the podcast mentioned eye contact during conversations.
It's so important.
Right. Like maintaining good eye contact
Yeah.
shows you're present.
Yeah, you're engaged. You're interested in what they're saying.
Totally. It
Yeah.
just makes a conversation feel more real.
Yeah, more personal.
But like you said earlier,
Yeah.
those cultural differences are a big deal.
They are, yeah.
Like I was in Japan a few years back,
Okay.
and people there don't really do a lot of eye contact,
Yeah, I know.
especially in formal settings.
Yeah.
It can be seen as aggressive.
Exactly.
Wild, right?
It is. So yeah, it's all about being sensitive
Yeah,
to those differences.
for sure.
And adjusting how you communicate.
Exactly.
Okay, and so switching gears a bit.
Okay.
The podcast had some great tips on improving your speaking.
Oh, yeah.
And one that really stood out to me was like,
Uh-huh.
don't be afraid to mess up.
Oh, my God, yes.
I know, right?
Everyone's so scared of making mistakes.
I know. But the podcast really made me realize that mistakes are part of the learning process.
Yeah, it's how you learn.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Uh-huh.
You're going to fall a few times
Exactly.
before you get it.
You got to fall off to learn how to stay on.
Right.
Yeah.
So true. We learn by trying things out,
Yeah.
even if we mess up sometime.
Exactly, and that's
Right.
how we get better.
Yeah, and build that confidence.
Yeah. And you know what's a really good way to find out what you need to work on?
What's that?
Recording yourself.
Oh, man.
I know.
I know.
I hate it.
I hate it too, but it really does help.
I know, it's like...
It's like a mirror
Yes, exactly.
for how you speak English.
You can hear those little stumbles.
The pauses,
Yeah.
the words you're mispronouncing
Yeah,
that you don't even realize you're doing.
it's true.
Like when I first started doing this, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's painful.
I use and like way too much.
Yeah, me too. It's like, you don't even realize you're doing it.
I know. It's amazing what you notice
I know.
when you actually hear yourself.
But once you know what to work on,
Right.
you can practice those things.
Totally.
Like you said.
Yeah.
Get rid of those filler words.
Uh-huh.
Slow down your pace.
Yeah.
Work on those tricky sounds.
Yeah. And the best part is you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, it's so easy.
You don't need anything fancy.
Just your phone or computer.
Yeah.
And you're good to go.
Yeah. And then speaking of practice,
Yeah.
the podcast also emphasized finding chances to actually talk to people.
Oh, yeah. Get out there and use it.
Yeah. Whether it's joining a conversation club,
Yeah.
doing language exchanges,
Yeah.
or just chatting with English speakers in your community.
Yeah, just talk to people.
The key is to just use the language.
Exactly. It's like taking those skills for a spin.
Yeah. Like a test drive.
Yeah. And you'll hit some bumps along the way.
For sure.
But that's all part of the process.
Yeah.
It's how you learn and get better.
Totally.
Yeah.
And every conversation is a chance to learn,
Yeah.
try new things,
Uh-huh.
and just improve your communication skills.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even if you stumble a bit.
Yeah. Don't let it stop you.
Right.
Keep talking. Keep practicing.
Keep learning.
Yes.
We're back for the last part of our deep dive into the best way to learn English. And I'm still thinking about all those cool tips we've talked about.
Me too. So much good stuff.
Have you tried that active listening challenge yet?
I have. I've been really focusing on asking those clarifying questions, and it's been amazing.
Right. It's like you suddenly understand everything so much better.
Totally. It's like you said, it's like having X-ray vision for conversations.
Exactly. And speaking of understanding things better,
Yeah.
the podcast had a really interesting point about intonation.
Oh, yeah. Intonation.
It's something we don't always think about,
We don't.
but it can really change how people understand what we're saying.
It really can. You know, I used to think intonation was just about like sounding happy or sad,
Right.
but it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Like even a simple phrase,
Mm-hmm.
like thank you,
Yeah.
can sound totally different depending on how you say it.
Right. You can use it to show gratitude or just be polite
Yeah.
or even be sarcastic.
Exactly. It's like it adds another layer of meaning to our words.
Yeah. It's like the secret ingredient to sounding more natural.
I like that. The secret ingredient.
The podcast suggests paying attention to how native speakers use their intonation
Yeah.
and even practicing different ways of saying things in front of a mirror.
It sounds a little funny, but it really helps.
I know it feels a little weird, but it works.
It does. It helps you like control those little ups and downs in your voice.
Totally.
And that can really change how people understand you.
Right. And that attention to detail is super important,
It is.
especially when we're talking about those transitional phrases.
Oh, yeah. Those little bridges between our thoughts.
Right.
They're so important.
It's like learning to play an instrument.
Okay.
You can know all the notes,
Yeah.
but without the right rhythm and timing, it won't sound good.
Exactly. Those transitions help us organize our thoughts and make our speech flow smoothly.
Yeah. And the podcast made a good point about not just memorizing a bunch of phrases.
Oh, yeah. You can't just use them randomly.
Right. You have to understand what they do
Yeah, you got to know when to use each one.
and use them at the right time.
Exactly. To guide the listener through what you're saying.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to touch on one last thing from the podcast.
Okay.
It's about those aha moments in language learning.
Ooh, I love those moments.
Yeah, it's when something finally clicks.
Yeah, like you suddenly understand something.
Right. Or you can finally say that phrase you've been struggling with.
Yeah. Or you realize you can have a conversation without feeling totally lost.
It's the best feeling.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast encourages us to really enjoy those moments.
We should celebrate those little victories.
Totally, because they show us how far we've come.
Exactly. Those moments keep us going.
Yeah, they remind us why we're learning in the first place.
And they inspire us to keep going.
So true. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the best way to learn English,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
Learning a language is a journey.
It is.
It's not a race.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. There will be challenges.
Yeah, you'll hit some roadblocks.
And there will be times you feel like giving up.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But remember, every step you take,
Uh-huh.
every word you learn,
Every conversation you have.
it all gets you closer to your goal.
It does.
So be patient,
Yeah.
embrace the challenges,
Don't give up.
and never stop exploring.
Yeah, the English language is amazing.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this awesome journey of language discovery.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Keep those ears open, those voices strong, and those conversations flowing.